Yamcha's Isekai story you never knew. What if Yamcha didn't die right away during the battle against Vegeta and Nappa? What if he had kept on training instead of diverting his attention towards Bulma? But most of all, what if the Yamcha we knew was actually a Japanese guy reincarnated as the Desert Bandit himself? If you are curious about these many possibilities, and even further beyond, I suggest you stay put. But first, let's talk a little bit about Yamcha himself. How Yamcha entered Dragon Ball. Yamcha is one of the biggest classics in the Dragon Ball franchise. Originally, he was first introduced in the Dragon Ball manga as one of the many characters who started off as a sort of antagonist for Goku, but not in the villainous. Yamcha was more of a bandit who, yeah, maybe wasn't making a living in the most honest of ways, but upon meeting Goku and Bulma, he quickly shifted. After their explosive first meeting, Yamcha ends up joining the main Dragon Ball team and quickly becomes a core member of Goku's group. Back then, Yamcha was still a pretty strong fighter, since he eventually studied under Roshi and became quite an adept martial artist. However, as time went on and power escalated, Yamcha stopped being able to actually become relevant in fights, and especially with the arrival of Raditz, Nappa, and Vegeta. He suddenly became a meme of the franchise after this fight, but not all stories go quite like that for Yamcha. Yamcha's Isekai manga. There have been many great Dragon Ball manga fan artists throughout, and some, like Toyotaro, even managed to land a spot as an official Dragon Ball creator. But he wasn't the only one to be granted such an honor. Dragon Garo Lee is another well-known artist in the Dragon Ball community, and they also got especially famous due to them being a massive Yamcha fan. That passion they felt for Yamcha was also enough in the end to land them a spot as a Dragon Ball manga author in the most unexpected of ways, through the very isekai story of Yamcha. The manga, which is known as Dragon Ball, That Time I Got Reincarnated as Yamcha, was serialized in Shonen Jump Plus from December 11, 2016 until August 14, 2017, and it consisted of 3 chapters that covered up to the events of the Cell Saga. Yes, that's quite a lot of Dragon Ball story all cramped up in such a short split of content, but it actually makes quite a ton of sense for the manga. Actually, why don't we dive into the Isekai story so that you can see for yourself why it actually became quite a successful story. Yamcha's Isekai, Chapter 1, The Reincarnation. Funny enough, Dragon Ball, That Time I Got Reincarnated as Yamcha, doesn't actually start with Yamcha himself. Actually, it doesn't even start within Dragon Ball itself. Considering that this is an Isekai story, it does make sense, since there's someone that has to be reincarnated as Yamcha, and that someone is introduced to us as a young Japanese student. The very first thing shown to us is that this student is a massive Dragon Ball fan. First, there's him talking to a friend about a Dragon Ball attraction making its grand debut, and then there's him stating that he got first place in a Dragon Ball Dokkan event, the smartphone game that just recently celebrated its 10th anniversary. But when Dragon Ball, That Time I Got Reincarnated as Yamcha first came out, Dokkan Battle had been alive for about a year at most, which again goes to show that the kid is such a fan of Dragon Ball that he basically checked out everything about the franchise. It's also interesting that the MC is introduced to us as a guy that doesn't really interact that much with girls. He even states that it'd be great to find a girl who's into Dragon Ball. And quite honestly, one cannot contradict such a statement. The funny thing here is that at the beginning of Dragon Ball, Yamcha was actually terrified of women. Even though he was an incredibly handsome guy, he wasn't able to properly interact with girls up until he met Bulma, with whom he started a relationship and eventually managed to overcome his fear. The two students kept on about their business, with the MC commenting that Yamcha turned out to be more useful than expected. Guess you just read a chapter of Dragon Ball recently. But then, the main event of the introduction starts to take shape. The friend of the MC tells him to check out a girl that's walking by on the street, wearing a very short skirt. The MC doesn't even think twice about it and starts running in order not to miss the chance of him seeing what was the result of Oolong's original wish. He is about to be reincarnated as Yamcha, but he could very well become Oolong himself, or even Master Roshi. Then, it finally happened. The boy trips, going down the stairs, falls in an incredibly dramatic way, and upon opening his eyes, he is already Yamcha. Yup, he has died in his world and has reincarnated as Yamcha in the Dragon Ball world. A dream or a nightmare? We are definitely about to find out. The first few moments after the MC realizes that he has indeed died and reincarnated as Yamcha are worthy of peak Conan Edogawa. MC starts reviewing the events that led up to him awakening as Yamcha and suddenly realizes that he has become the main character of the common reincarnation trope in fantasy manga. The realization has hit him. He is indeed Yamcha. Why couldn't it be Goku or Vegeta? In all honesty, and no disrespect intended towards Yamcha, I don't think that there are many Dragon Ball fans that would actually be happy of being reincarnated as Yamcha, especially being aware of just how humiliating the character ends up being as he suffers down the line. Moving forward, the MC finds out that he is not alone, but by the time he has reincarnated in Yamcha, the bandit has already met both Bulma and Goku, and they are pretty much right behind him. The MC then sees Bulma and is shocked at just how incredibly pretty she is in person, and also at how cute little Goku looks at the time. But here comes the big moment for the MC. As Yamcha, he knows that he will end up in a relationship with Bulma, and for a guy who basically is chasing skirts in the real world, there's not a better possible outcome, at least for the time being. That's why the MC promises not to cheat on Bulma and stay by her side, which is something that the real Yamcha never actually accomplished. As the scenes play out, the MC starts enjoying the fact that he was basically watching the anime play out right in front of him, and even has some powerful knowledge of what is happening. For instance, explaining to Goku how he has suddenly lost his balance. Of course, the MC has to try his best in order to fit into the new reality he is now living in, which is why he even tries to imitate even the dumbest comedy tropes, such as falling backwards when something dumb happens on screen. When things seem like they're starting to flow nicely for the MC, and he is about to leave for West City all by himself with Bulma, he realizes that if he goes off and doesn't train, he'll end up dying just like it happened with the real Yamcha. That's actually a huge advantage for the MC, given that he already knows the future that awaits him. He can take precautions in order to avoid certain doom. He doesn't really have a power like Subaru's from ReZero, so that he can keep coming back to life, at least that he's aware of. But on the bright side, there's the reality that Yamcha is actually human with an incredible potential, and in spite of his meme status, there's very few Earthlings that end up as strong as him. Therefore, if the MC starts training with Roshi very early on, it is likely that he will grow stronger than the original Yamcha. After some careful deliberation, the MC comes to the conclusion that for now, it is better to say his goodbyes to Bulma, but not before promising to come back to her after he's become quite a powerful fighter. This decision follows a considerable time skip. Yamcha leaves with Goku and starts training under Roshi, although the manga doesn't really show any scenes of them getting to Roshi's place or the training process. Instead, a little gag of Yamcha not being able to get on the flying Nimbus because of his impure heart, we suddenly reach the arrival of Nappa and Vegeta. In front of the Saiyans, there's the premium classic Z Fighters lineup, being led by Yamcha himself, and there's no hesitation on the MC side. Once he sees all 6 of the Cybermen, he challenges Vegeta to be able to defeat all of the monsters simultaneously. Obviously, both Nappa and Vegeta seem to believe that Yamcha's bluffing, he will soon suffer the consequences of his overconfidence. Even Krillin doesn't seem to be sure of the MC being able to defeat all those enemies. Still, the second Cyberman jumps towards Yamcha, and the monster is one-shotted in a split second. Absolutely nobody expected this outcome, and considering that Yamcha seems to have grown way stronger than your average Cyberman, all of the monsters surround him in order to detonate. Originally, Yamcha died in Dragon Ball after a single Cyberman grabbed onto him and exploded, so the 6 of them will surely be enough to obliterate the Earthling. But Yamcha is completely unscathed. Sure, his clothes might be a little worn out after such an explosion, but the MC has stretched the limits of the power of Yamcha to a point that he looks completely unrecognizable. Almost stronger than Goku himself? But how has Yamcha become so powerful? This is something that Piccolo seems to be asking himself, and even though the first chapter of the manga doesn't seem to provide an answer, there's a massive hint. MC traveled all the way to Namek in order to have his potential unlocked. The potential unlocked feature is one we see applied on Krillin and Gohan during the Namek saga, and they experience a noticeable increase in power. It is very likely then that at some point, the MC convinces Bulma to help him get to Namek in order to receive the power up himself in preparation for the upcoming battle with Vegeta and Nappa. Judging from what we see in the battle against the Cybermen, it really looks like the plan is a huge success. Yamcha's Isekai, Chapter 2, Battle Against the Saiyan. The second chapter of Yamcha's Isekai story starts with a little summary of how the MC ended up as a part of the Dragon Ball world, but quickly resumes to the Saiyan saga. The reincarnated Yamcha is getting ready to fight both Nappa and Vegeta, and he knows that he must win no matter what. After all, if he dies, he doesn't know if he'll disappear forever. Because even if he does die like Yamcha and gets resurrected, there's no way to tell whether the MC would be able to once again occupy Yamcha's body, or if the real Yamcha would get back his body. After all, one could interpret the doing of the Japanese student as body theft, even if that was never his intention. Before starting the fight against the Saiyans, we get a little summary of how events have unfolded up until this very point in time. For instance, with Yamcha training hard with both Goku and Krillin. However, there was really no way for him to tell if he had grown strong enough in order to survive the fight, which is the reason that he took to desperate measures. He got Popo to show him the ship that was once used by Piccolo, and had Capsule Corp prepare it in order to confirm the previous suspicion. The MC travels to Namek in order to find the Grand Elder Guru, who is the only one with the ability to unlock his potential. Once the reincarnated Yamcha meets the old Namekian, the Grand Elder Guru looks into Yamcha's past so that he can understand why this Earthling is so interested in having a massive power-up boost granted to him. Surprisingly, the Grand Elder Guru is able to look into the MC's past, even up until when he was still in the real world, which should confirm the fact that Yamcha's soul is definitely no longer in his own body, but rather that the MC has completely taken over Yamcha's psyche, memories, and his whole being overall. Upon deliberating whether this new Yamcha is worthy of having his potential unlocked or not, the Grand Elder Guru seemed convinced with the fact that it will not be troublesome to grant him his wishes. Upon getting his potential unlocked, the MC feels a huge energy surge welling up inside him. It seems like he has everything he needs to face the Saiyan, but he really wants to take some extra precaution, which is the reason he asks Nail to train with him. Now, this is certainly no minor thing, considering that Nail's power was measured at 42,000 units during the Namek Saga, and by the time that Vegeta first landed on Earth, he supposedly was sitting at around 18,000 units. This implies that if Yamcha trains with Nail and is somehow able to keep up with him, he should be more than strong enough to face both Vegeta and Nappa without the fear of dying. Luckily for Yamcha, even though Nail doesn't seem interested in fulfilling his requests, the Namekian is in the end persuaded to help Yamcha with the prospect of the Earthling becoming an incredibly powerful ally in the future. After a few months of training with Nail, the MC seems really confident in his upcoming battle against Nappa and Vegeta. But suddenly, a minor inconvenience hits him. He forgets that the Saiyans end up arriving on Earth way earlier than originally expected, and that totally caught him off guard. It would be extremely ridiculous for him to have gone to such great lengths in order to make sure that he is able to survive, only for him not to show up in time for the real conflict. And when times are desperate, then so desperate are the measures that must be taken in order to keep moving forward. Hence, Yamcha concludes that there is only one possible solution for him to fix this mistake. Ask the Namekians for one last favor, which is also granted. In the end, the power of the Dragon Balls allow Yamcha to ask Porunga for an instantaneous warp to Earth, which seems to kind of surprise Porunga, considering that all the power In the end, the power of the Dragon Balls allows Yamcha to ask Porunga for an instantaneous warp to planet Earth, which seems to be kind of a surprise for Porunga, considering with all the power that it wields, it is basically turned into some sort of magical transportation device. Yamcha finally manages to land on Earth after saying his goodbyes to Nail, and not a second has passed that he already notices the power of the Saiyan. Pretty much like in Goku fashion, the very next second that Yamcha speeds up to the battlefield of all his allies, from Tien to Krillin, they notice that he has become incredibly powerful. And the MC even states that I'm not the old Yamcha anymore. We still do not know for certain if the MC has managed to become a Yamcha so powerful that he can now defeat the Saiyans, but at the very least, it looks like he's managed to grow much stronger than his Earthling comrade. After such a big flashback, we get to the present, with Yamcha starting to unleash his power, which leads to a really funny moment. Vegeta reads his power as being over 10,000, which is both a change to the original 8,000 read of Goku's power during this time, and also from the 9,000 line which is used in the old dub. But such a statement is not to be taken simply as a joke, because this is also confirmation that Yamcha has grown even stronger than Goku in the original timeline at this point. There's also an interesting interaction at this moment. Yamcha states that all of this power is what he has been building up from the moment he reincarnated onward, which seems to confuse Vegeta. Is it even remotely possible that Vegeta knows anything at all from this phenomenon? We of course do not get an answer to the question at this point, but instead the action switches to focus on Nappa trying to surprise Yamcha, even though we don't get to see much. It is kind of disappointing honestly, but all we get is a mere manga panel with confirmation that Yamcha was able to smoke Nappa, most likely through an incredibly powerful Kamehameha. considering the MC's pose. Then, there's another time leap, and we are suddenly transported to a climactic moment of the battle with both reincarnated Yamcha and Goku dealing with Vegeta. This scene seems to actually confirm that even with his potential unlocked and having trained for months with Nail, all the MC has managed to do is grow to a point where he can more or less stand on equal grounds with Goku. The MC starts to notice that in order to defeat Vegeta, they need to come up with a strategy, and he actually seems to mirror that which happened in the Buu saga, when Vegeta is taking a beating for Goku so that Goku is able to prepare a powerful technique in order to defeat the villain. This time around though, the scenario is that Yamcha is against Vegeta, and the MC seems to have the confidence that he can at least last enough for Goku to prepare the attack that will defeat the Saiyan once and for all. Yamcha and Vegeta start trading blows, and they're pretty much at equal strength, although Vegeta is looking like he is faring a little bit better. Then, there's an instance in which the MC actually reminds us all of one of the main reasons he has trained so hard since becoming Yamcha. He must defeat Vegeta so that the Prince of all Saiyans doesn't take Bulma from him. Vegeta, obviously, is completely at a loss, but the MC doesn't need his enemy to understand his reasoning for him to give it his all. The battle still rages on, and here comes a moment when the MC's knowledge of Dragon Ball actually plays a huge role. He is aware that Vegeta is completely terrified of the God of Destruction, Beerus, which is why he pretends that the god is actually witnessing the battle. Due to how unexpected Yamcha's comment is, Vegeta instinctively reacts, which provides the MC with enough of a window to actually land a massive double kick on Vegeta and send the Saiyan flying. The MC is definitely doing everything in his power in order to make sure that Goku can prepare that full power attack. This time around though, there's no spirit bomb to be seen. Instead, Goku fires off a massive Kamehameha that completely obliterates Vegeta, seemingly disintegrating him. Goku is completely exhausted after the attack, but it seems to be successful, which is enough reason for Yamcha to start jumping with joy. Somehow, that Japanese teenager who was a Dragon Ball nerd has pulled off Yamcha's most impressive victory to this day. During this time of celebration, the MC gets into quite a nice moment with Goku. The two of them share the feeling of joy and relief at absolutely no one dying during such a hard battle, something that didn't happen in the original telling of the story. Even Goku seems honestly impressed with how powerful Yamcha has become. Asking for his regime, he notices something he definitely didn't expect after Goku's final attack. Vegeta has managed to not only survive, but even get to his pod and start flying away. There's this interesting change in the storyline with the MC now taking on the role of Krillin. Without the reincarnated Yamcha, it is Krillin who is in the position of finishing Vegeta, with the Saiyan trying to call back to his pod. However, Goku manages to persuade his best friend not to kill Vegeta at that time, but will he manage to do the same with a Yamcha who seems to have a ton of different reasons for wanting Vegeta dead? At first, it looks like Yamcha is not interested in taking any chances, but there's something that suddenly stops him. That realization that if he kills Vegeta, Trunks will never get to exist. From the very first moment that the MC reincarnated into Yamcha, it was obvious that his knowledge of the Dragon Ball world had the potential to change a lot of stuff in the future. But the thing is, was this young Japanese Dragon Ball fan going to be so greedy that he would hurt other characters in order to get what he wanted? If he truly was a Dragon Ball fan, if he really had been following all of the friendship and camaraderie from the original Akira Toriyama timeline, he would back down from this selfish desire and let the story unfold in the happiest way possible for all the characters involved. Doubts started creeping into the MC's mind at this point. What is he going to do moving forward? Is he just going to be fighting for the sake of it? And what if, given that he has become stupidly strong, has he forced the other Z fighters to fall back? That would mean that for certain they will lack enough strength in order to face the massive threats they have in front of them moving forward. With how confused Yamcha is right now, he doesn't seem to be aware of how amazing it is of what he has just pulled off, and Kami looks worried about precisely that. Still, the chapter does not finish with Yamcha's doubts, but rather with the revelation that there is another reincarnated soul amongst the Z Fighter. Even if the identity remains a mystery at this point, it looks like Yamcha is not the only one to not be himself, and the other reincarnated buddy simply has no words after witnessing how crazy powerful Yamcha has become. Actually, there's quite an interesting line stating, how many times has he done this? Which seems to imply that the reincarnation process can be achieved multiple times. After all, the young Japanese student became Yamcha only after he died in the real world. Does this mean that dying in the Dragon Ball world transports one back to their origin world? For this sole reason, Chapter 3 and the finale of Yamcha's Isekai story is definitely one to look forward to. Yamcha's Isekai, Chapter 3, Reincarnated Souls. The final chapter of Yamcha's Isekai story starts off pretty similar to Chapter 2, with a little summary of the MC situation and all of the reincarnation shenanigans. Once we jump into the action, it's quite interesting to see that the timeline has moved forward all the way to the Cell game. In this instance, Dragon Garo Lee opted to skip all of the events that took place within the Namek saga as well as afterward. Most likely because this spin-off manga was never supposed to be a mega project in the Dragon Ball franchise. But still, right off the bat, there's an interesting development. MC opts not to show up against Cell. The main character of the manga is aware that the original role of Yamcha in the Cell games was not really that big, and at the end of the Saiyan saga, he was determined not to alter that much of the events of the Dragon Ball storyline. Still, the reincarnated Yamcha is shown as getting ready for a big battle, but who is he supposed to be fighting if he ditches the showdown against Cell? Well, it turns out that the suspicions have finally been confirmed. The MC is not the only soul within a Dragon Ball character that has been reincarnated. Quite shocking, to say the least. Upon arriving at his intended destiny, there's another Z fighter on the scene, Chaozu. At first, Chaozu acts surprised at the fact that Yamcha summoned him there and decided to skip the Cell battle. However, the MC summons his inner Phoenix Wright and tells Chaozu to stop playing dumb, since the two of them are actually reincarnated souls. At this point in time, the fake Chaozu finally reveals the truth. He is not the original fighter that always accompanied Tien, but instead, just like the MC, he is a reincarnated soul. However, considering that Yamcha is the one that's taken initiative in this one-on-one, the fake Chaozu expresses interest in how he got to know that he was also a reincarnated soul. Well, let's just say that the reincarnated Chaozu also did everything he could in order to not die. There was an instance where Chaozu wasn't surprised at a math question, or another instance where he disobeyed Tien. Overall, it seems pretty much like Yamcha, the reincarnated Chaozu has been diverting his path from the original character. Of course, all in order not to share the same destiny. But if all those little moments weren't enough, it looks like there was an instance in the Namek saga with Chaozu trying to gather all of the Dragon Balls and make a wish of his own. Of course, the MC could have thought that Chaozu's weird behavior was a coincidence of him altering the Dragon Ball storyline in previous instances, but the fact that only Chaozu didn't behave as expected was too suspicious. Then, there's a shocking revelation coming from Chaozu. It seems like he has died already multiple times trying to live the life of Chaozu. With the MC's reincarnation, it was impossible to know for certain what would happen if he died. But Chaozu now confirms that it seems to be some kind of cycle thing, with the reincarnated soul occupying the body every time they die. Then comes another reveal, which explains this reincarnated soul's downfall. It seems that in his previous life, the now reincarnated soul was an elite student who was aiming really high in life, but then he got trapped inside the body of one of the most mediocre fighters in all of Dragon Ball. And it's not like the reincarnated soul didn't try to live an honest life at first, but after dying a ton of times, they just got sick of it. Hard to know how anyone would react if they just returned to the life, only to know that they most likely be trapped in a never-ending cycle of life and death as someone who they do not identify with. After a little discourse, the fake Chaozu reveals what's now his plan. He is going to try and take over the world. And the biggest hurdle right now is the reincarnated Yamcha, who is aware of his peculiar situation. That's the reason that Chaozu has decided to kill the MC, and he doesn't even hesitate to attack. Suddenly, Yamcha is forced to avoid a massive psychic explosion. It seems that in the same way that the MC has trained his Yamcha well beyond his limits, the reincarnated Chaozu has been doing the same. Let's remember that by the end of the Saiyan saga, the reincarnated Chaozu was completely shocked at just how powerful the new Yamcha had become. So this probably told him that if another reincarnated soul was able to increase the power of the character beyond what the Dragon Ball storyline originally could, he too should be able to accomplish such a feat. The battle that unfolds at this point is quite an interesting one. Chaozu keeps on using his psychic powers to attack the MC, this time around using a ton of different rocks to force Yamcha to stop those projectiles. Obviously, the reincarnated Chaozu was not expecting to defeat this new Yamcha with a bunch of rocks. His strategy was a very different one, to force an opening that could get him to close Yamcha for a deadly sneak attack, and he succeeds. Yamcha notices a second too late that Chaozu is excessively close to him, and upon trying to hit him, he is left wide open. Chaozu shoots a point-blank range Dodonpa to Yamcha that actually pierces the body of the MC, leaving him gravely injured. Yamcha falls immediately to the ground, and Chaozu starts to relish in his victory. It definitely looks like the MC might be done this time around. He has survived not only due to training hard, but also because he kept using his head. Then, when Chaozu shoots what should have been the finisher, Yamcha is suddenly able to avoid the attack. But how? He should have been close to death after that serious injury he just suffered. Luckily, the MC was more than ready this time as well, having prepared beforehand a sensubi in anticipation that he might end up in the situation he's just been thrown into. Once again, the MC displays his incredible Dragon Ball knowledge, explaining that he managed to get a bunch of sensu beans due to the fact that he climbed Korin's tower before Yajirobe. If he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have been able to secure that which was basically just what saved his life. Even though he almost got killed, in very Goku-like fashion, the MC starts telling Chaozu that they really do not need to be enemies, especially given that the two of them are the only ones sharing this reincarnation condition, at least that they are aware of. But Chaozu doesn't seem keen on taking that route, so knowing that Yamcha has multiple sensu beans, he uses his telekinetic powers to grab the bag right in front of the MC's eyes. Yamcha is again on the defensive as the reincarnated Chaozu is getting ready to finish him off for good, and it seems like the MC has no answer whatsoever for his incredibly powerful psychic abilities that this Chaozu is displaying. However, there's something that he can defeat: cast doubt on his knowledge of Dragon Ball. Therefore, the MC asks a question that very few Dragon Ball fans have an answer for. What's Yamcha's birthday? Considering that not all birthdays are known regarding Dragon Ball characters, and that Yamcha was losing screen time little by little was actually not a well-known fact, and it really did its part. It distracted Chaozu. Not only does Chaozu lose focus in the fight, but even gets the answer wrong, which the MC uses to correct him and attack him with a surprise attack, pretty much like Chaozu did early on. With Chaozu now mostly incapacitated, the MC is about to perform one of the most spectacular and iconic techniques within Dragon Ball, the Mafuba. The MC doesn't really want to kill his reincarnated buddy, so he instead will try and trap him into a little flask, perhaps until he somehow finds a solution for the animosity of the reincarnated Chaozu. Everything is ready for the Mafuba. The MC seems to be about to get the win in what has to become one of his most important battles so far, but he somehow fails. Well, not really, because just when Yamcha was about to finally trap Chaozu, he remembers something that the reincarnated soul said earlier in the fight. He was a Dragon Ball fanatic known online as Oshu. And as it turns out, the MC actually knows who Oshu is. The reincarnated Chaozu is shocked at first at the fact that Yamcha didn't want to finish him off, but he is even more surprised when the reincarnated Yamcha seems to be aware of the Oshu that has always placed first in Dragon Ball events. And the only time the MC was able to place first was because Oshu was not there. In the end, not only did the two of them reincarnate in the Dragon Ball world, but they also shared a gaming rivalry in one of the most well-known Dragon Ball games all around the world. After realizing that they are really not that different, the two reincarnated individuals start sharing some memories from their days as Dragon Ball fans, until the reincarnated Chaozu breaks down. As a Dragon Ball fan, he is really aware of how evil works, and why it is important to fight in order to protect those for which you care, not only for selfish reasons. Finally, Chaozu seems like he's ready to leave his evil self behind, which is obviously very reassuring for the MC. After a little more conversation, and confirming that he left behind his initial ambition of staying with Bulma, the MC concludes that he will relax and enjoy his life as Yamcha, even if both him and the reincarnated are destined to be killed by Majin Buu. However, very surprisingly, this is not the end of the story. We are suddenly zoomed out of the conversation between Yamcha and Chaozu and are placed within a space occupied by both Beerus and Champa. And here comes the biggest of plot twists. In the end, it turns out that the reincarnation process was a game that the two brothers were playing all along. Beerus gets incredibly angry at the fact that he didn't get the win, even though it looks like he always manages to get ahead of Champa, and suddenly decides to completely destroy the game of reincarnation. With the gods of destruction still discussing, we get a shot of both Whis and Vados. Now that Beerus has destroyed the game of reincarnation, Vados confirms that the souls of both Yamcha and Chaozu have been liberated, and Whis is ready to return the MC as well as the other soul to their original bodies. That's exactly what happened. The MC wakes up once again in the real world, only to be met by his buddy, who explains to him that he took a crazy tumble for whatever reason. The MC seems to still feel that there's some Yamcha inside of him, and with a sudden hand move, he creates a powerful gust of wind, which lifts the skirt of the girl he was originally chasing after. Both the MC and his friends simply cannot believe it, but upon trying once again, nothing happens. Was it just a coincidence, or has a little bit of Yamcha's power stayed within the MC? Yamcha's Isekai manga, the review. Dragon Garo Lee's Dragon Ball, That Time I Got Reincarnated as Yamcha, is definitely one of a kind. A well-known fan artist got the chance to create an official Dragon Ball story and did so in a fashion that fans always loved, through the scenarios of what ifs. What if Yamcha didn't die in the Saiyan saga? What if Yamcha was as strong as Goku? Such questions are answered through Dragon Garo Lee's interpretation in Dragon Ball, That Time I Got Reincarnated as Yamcha. And do I dare say that it is one heck of a read. From a visual standpoint, the artist does a phenomenal job. The original characters have a pretty nice design, kind of an old school looking design, which fits with the Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z scene. But then, there is also the designs of the official Dragon Ball characters, which certainly look good. That is especially the case with Yamcha. Although, we already know that Dragon Garo Lee is a massive Yamcha fan. There's no bigger proof of it than the fact that you really can't tell his Yamcha apart from that of Akira Toriyama. Truly a fantastic job at replicating Toriyama Sensei's art style. Then, there's the narrative beats, which overall are pretty enjoyable. The way that Dragon Garo Lee chooses to deviate from the main storyline actually fits the MC's initial desires, and also later on when he comes to the realization that the Dragon Ball story is not his story to change. The main criticism is the fact that there are way too many story events that are completely skipped from the original storyline. This was obviously due to the fact that this was supposed to be a small project, so there's no way that this was going to be a complete retelling of the whole Dragon Ball storyline through a reincarnated Yamcha's eye. Still, the fact that all of the Namek saga as well as the Android saga don't have a representation at all in the manga is kind of underwhelming. If you enjoyed learning about such unique Dragon Ball content, don't go anywhere. On the DB Hype channel, we've got all sorts of Dragon Ball content, from Dragon Ball Super to Daima and even GT. So if you want to enjoy more of this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and spread the word. See you soon, Saiyans!